The Rebel Capitalist Show. Let's talk about the world in which we live. It's getting
Yeah.
crazier and crazier and crazier. What's been on your mind the last couple weeks?
You know, watching this inflation, watching the inflation scenario go down, watching a lot of the distribution networks, especially, me, I'm involved in the lumber industry. I do
Yeah,
retail sales of lumber for a living. So I really focus in on a lot of building supplies and what's taking place as far as building supplies go. This has an impact on the rest of the economy, being that real estate and, construction is like a major industry here in the United States, and it really dictates how the economy is rolling. So when you're seeing disruptions taking place as far as new construction, distribution of building supplies, and then ultimately the end product, the homes, I mean, you put all these things together and man, you really start painting a kind of a crazy scenario that could turn into something that could be very catastrophic in the future. Um,
expand on that. I mean, what are you
yeah,
seeing? Yeah, I mean, you got the
well,
boots on the ground. You're in the trenches every day. So, what are you seeing
yeah,
with the supply chains for the materials that go into creating new housing supply?
yeah. It's really interesting to watch. I mean, there is some stuff that is really taking a very long lead time, and the prices are incredibly high, while other things haven't changed much. Like not only in pricing, but just availability. Like they never changed. It was the same availability, same price, been consistent this entire time. So to me, that's a very peculiar event to take place. And
Right.
mainly I'm talking about 15-pound asphalt impregnated felt. It's a very common building product. I mean, there is nothing special about this stuff at all. It's just a vapor barrier. So when you're sheathing your house, you got your plywood that goes up, you put a vapor barrier up, and then you put your
Yeah.
siding up.
Yep.
Well, that particular vapor barrier, there's a lot of new products out there. So I shouldn't say it's like the most common one, because there's a lot of vapor barriers, especially with these new products that are coming out every day. But it's probably the most common one. And it was $32 a roll 4 years ago. It's $32 a roll today. I've never missed out on a supply of it. It's been there the entire time.
Where is it produced?
I'm not exactly sure what location, because you can get this from several locations here in the United States. But
Okay.
from what I understand, it's just fiber and asphalt, and there's not a lot of labor that goes into it. It's probably pretty much all automated.
But it's produced here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's produced here in the US. So, I keep an eye on some of those things. But then you go and you look at like things like vinyl windows. Now, I used to order a vinyl window and have it in 10 days. Now it takes over 2 months. And that vinyl window that used to cost $150 now costs 280. So
Wow.
these things have dramatically changed. And when you think about like when you're a builder who's constructing homes, it's all about having a continuous supply of materials coming to the job.
Yeah.
If there is a disruption in that continuous supply, then the projects start going out in lead times, the prices start going up, everything starts getting disrupted. And then you have issues where you're lining up contractors. If you're not doing all the work yourself, if you don't get that material in time for the subcontractor to come in, you miss out on that window of opportunity to have that subcontractor come in, and there's really not a lot of other availability of people out there. Now your building goes out even further. So what we're having is an issue in completing homes, the completion of homes. And if you go and look at some of the charts that are out there right now, when you compare them to, say, permit issuance, and say like starts, you're going to see that there is like a separation between the amount of permits that are issued and starts and the completion of homes. So
Right.
they're starting them, they're issuing out the permits, but they can't complete them. At some point, I feel that there is going to be a reversal in this shortages, where those lead times of windows aren't going to be 8 weeks, but they're going to fall back down to 4 weeks again.
Right.
When this begins to happen, I feel at that moment we're going to have completions of homes coming in at the same time that homes are being completed faster. That could put a situation at the same time that we have interest rates rising due to the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. So I see like a scenario right in there where you hear these stories of the past where hedge funds were coming in and buying up massive amounts of homes, like mainly BlackRock. You're hearing a lot of these stories.
Yeah.
So now I get to think, and I was like, well, if we have any kind of little bit of a downturn in housing, it's not people who have purchased homes to live in where they don't really care about the prices maybe moving, but instead you have portfolios that need to be adjusted to make up for the fact that you have a depleting, a falling asset there. If a lot of these things have been rented out and you have rents falling, well, then you could go into like the laws of diminishing returns where people have taken out loans to buy a rental property, but they can't get the rent out of it, and therefore they can't make the payment on the loan.
Right.
These are the type of things that I kind of see happening or could possibly happen coming into the future, mainly like a year from now or so.
Okay, so I got a lot of questions there. Where is the vinyl windows being produced?
Vinyl windows get produced. Well, at least the ones that I purchased are made up here in the Pacific Northwest.
So still the
The main
United
issue,
States.
yeah, right here in the United States. Yeah, they're all manufactured, but they do use foreign parts, right?
Ah, okay.
So there's an issue right there where you're getting in some of the products that are not available to manufacture these windows in a time frame that we once
So
had.
maybe that's what explains it, where that other material you were talking about earlier, maybe that's all produced here. They don't have to rely on those the global supply chains,
That's exactly right. I mean, we
ports and
noticed it in
whatnot, the
lumber.
truckers. Yeah.
Yeah, lumber was a great indicator of that exact scenario. I mean, we saw lumber depletions. We saw the demand for it go up as everybody was locked down and got a stimulus check. They went out, bought a lot of lumber, depleted the inventory even more, ramped up production to try and fill in this demand, overproduced, and then you had a crash in the pricing. Right now, we're seeing the lumber prices move back into something that was once a normal price. When I say 500 per thousand, I think that's normal. Is it high comparatively to like say 2017 or 16? Yeah, but I mean, when you consider that we were selling lumber at 500 per thousand in 2018 before the pandemic, then yeah, that's a somewhat of a normal price. I mean, yeah, it's high, but it's normal.
Right.
Right now, we got the January contract pushing up into 800 per thousand, but there's a lot of things that are taking place. We got tariffs that are going to be kicking in right then. We have like the Canadian government who's putting restrictions on what they can log out of the BC area. So these restrictions that are being pushed onto the lumber industry, I mean, it just changes the perspective of things, right? So pretty soon you're going to have all these restrictions on lumber. Well, then you got the investors saying, hey, come January, we're going to have an issue with lumber and getting the distribution of it. So it doesn't surprise me to see 800 per thousand on the January contract right now. What will surprise me is if we actually close at 800 per thousand on that. I feel that we'll probably be back down to the 500 per thousand by the time that happens. And this news will no longer be like the changing information that's coming to the industry right now.
Yeah, so it's baked into the cake. That makes a lot of sense. And then I'd go back to what you're saying with your observation of the housing market, where these builders are going to bring more supply online, or could possibly bring more supply online because a lot of the supplies they need, those supply chain disruptions are being fixed. And therefore, more housing produced, supply goes up. At the same time, the Fed is increasing interest rates, and therefore you got supply going up while demand is going down, or purchasing power going purchasing power going down for those homes. Another thing I'd add is if the interest rate gets up high enough on the 10-year, and obviously that's a huge unknown, but you get to this tipping point with the private equity funds where do you really want to deal with tenants and toilets for 3 or 4% when you could go out and buy the 10-year treasury for 4%? And just assuming that it gets that high, obviously that's a big unknown. But if it does, I think you'll see a massive rotation of capital from the housing market back into treasuries, because it just, long term it makes more sense because you can still get that 4% yield without all the headache, and it's
Exactly.
far more liquid. So that could exacerbate this increased supply that you were referring to earlier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a good way to relate it back down to is that U.S. Treasury, because that 10-year, I mean, it's everything. Everything is revolves around that U.S. 10-year Treasury, and where it goes, everything as far as a loan goes with it. And yeah, if an investor can look at the U.S. Treasury and say, hey, man, I can loan the government and guarantee a return, or I can try and deal with a tenant and rent. I mean, you would
Right.
even take a little bit of a loss on it just to not have the headache,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's right.